Welcome everyone to the DRC focus area session on pediatric patient tracking and family reunification. We're very excited today to have three very special speakers who are going to talk about the ethical and legal issues in reunification. Next slide, please. The PPN is supported in part by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as part of several cooperative agreements. The content presented here is that of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of nor an endorsement by HRSA, HHS, or the U.S. government. Next slide, please. There are no disclosures today. You will see information on how to claim CE near the end of the session. Next slide. These are today's objectives. We're going to talk about accreditation and regulatory guidelines, legal liability, and how to share information and specifically focus on reunification practices, identify standards, if any, for reunification planning and practice, especially the minimum criteria for matching unaccompanied minors with caregivers, and we'll talk about chain of custody, etc. We will, of course, be applying ethical principles in reunification planning and practice as well. Next slide. Here's our agenda. Next slide, please. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Anna Lynn.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this amazing session. I'm so excited. I just wanted to remind folks that we have this Padlet, which has all of the resources for today's session and also links to our previous sessions and previous resources. Next slide, please. And it is my honor and privilege to actually introduce this awesome panel of ethical and legal experts. Will be talking to us about ethical and legal considerations for family reunification. Our first panelist is Dr. Marie Lauzon, who has been a faculty member at Michigan Medicine since 1991. She is a professor emerita of emergency medicine and pediatrics. And though she is PEM by training, she has served as the chief of staff for the University of Michigan's health system and the associate chief of emergency management before retiring in 2024. She remains so active in our world of pediatric preparedness and continues both funded and volunteer work as well as advocacy work in this realm. For Professor James Hodge is the Peter Kiewit, hopefully I'm saying that right, Foundation Professor of Law and the Director of the nationally ranked Center for Public Health and Policy at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, Arizona State University. Through scholarship, teaching, and projects, he actually delves into multiple areas of health law, public health law, ethics, and human rights. And if you've ever heard him speak, he is a fantastic speaker. And last but not least is Dr. Deborah DeBruin, who is the director of our Center for Bioethics at the University of Michigan. Her expertise is the ethics of public health and health policy, with a sustained focus on the ethics of disaster preparedness and response and health equity. She has extensive experience in developing ethical guidelines for public health emergency response. So warm welcome to our panelists. With this, I will turn it over to our first panel speaker, Dr. Lauzon.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to go very quickly, and I apologize for the lightning speed, but I'm like the opening comic. If you're going to a comedy showcase, I'm the local opener who's trying to do improv. And really, your headliners are Professor Hodge and Professor DeBruin, who I've worked with in both of my capacities in PPN and Region 5 for Kids. Next slide, please. These are my brief disclosures. They're the same as the PPN one we saw earlier. I also work for Region 5 for Kids Disaster Center of Excellence, which is funded by ASPR. Same type of disclosure. I have no financial interest in any products or protocols, and nor does my family. Next slide, please. I really want to highlight, we talked about that Padlet earlier. We have an abundance of riches if we choose to use them. If you go to the Padlet for this reunification focus area, you will find all of the past materials. And this is where I urge you, you'll hear the term duty to plan. This is where I urge you to use these materials in order to do your planning. Next. Our group, this triad, I am not a lawyer and I'm not an ethicist. I just hang around with some of the best ones and learn about the why. We're going to talk a little bit about the why today. This collaborative, the DRC, this team, Dr. Lin, Dr. Sarita Chung, and several others have talked about the who, the what, the where, the how, the operational issues, the best practices, but we're going to speak a little bit about the why. The why should be self-evident, but the why can sometimes help us to get our organizations to move forward on better practices. Next slide, please. I am showing this simply to say, again, the abundance of riches. I want to call your attention in the Padlet. You can review Dr. Michelle Pintea's materials from the December DRC about QI methodology. Next. She's got it written out for you, how to engage your team and how to put these workflows into your organization's methodology, calling the names. You can fill in the names in these little cells with the workflow that would work for your organization. It is right there for you. Next. And I also want to call out a publication, a fantastic publication at the co-authors of whom are on this session right now. Sarita Chung is here, Anna Lynn is here, and Rachel Charney and Kate Spektorsky as the lead author on the disaster science of family reunification. These are all the elements that need to be studied. They go into great detail on how on an update. This is only a 10-month-old publication. And to me, as I reviewed it, this is where every piece of this, the victims, issues about biometrics, the individual, the community, the federal agencies, other stakeholders can be included. It's just very capacious and a fantastic resource for groups that are attempting to get started on reunification or to update and upgrade their plans using quality improvement science. Next slide, please. It's like, again, it's all laid out there for you. The DRC focused area has so many great brief outlines. For example, this space staff stuff and supplies overview in 60 seconds. All those cells can be filled in your work group. As you say, let's try to do a process improvement on how we do family reunification. You may have a wonderful, very mature system in your organization, whether it be a health system, a hospital, a community hospital, or a tertiary care pediatric hospital. You may have that already set up, but you may have areas where you could do better. Maybe you don't quite have the number of staff to really swap out. You don't have enough child life folk or other voluntary staff to manage a pediatric safe area. Maybe you don't have the perfect pediatric safe area, but there's always an improvement to be made. And the DRC focus area Padlet has all the old or the previous speakers' slide decks, the resources. So I would encourage, pick and choose and use what you want in that Padlet to identify the gaps in your area and go forward. Next, please. It's got a roster for your planning team. You may not have an attorney who's a specialist in disaster, but your risk management officer, or somebody from your security system, logistics, the medical care groups. It's not just the emergency department, but you may need the other disciplines. And you can put that effective team together and do a gap analysis and really create a much more uplifted process. Next, please. Even these wonderful gifts of pre-written automated website or phone messages, if you want your communications team to start to be able to manage the incoming that you see after, for example, mass casualty incident, and you have worried parents calling in or checking a website, these are pre-made for you. Region 5 for Kids has already run a reunification, a dual state reunification exercise, and so many great things came out of the education that they've already created. Next slide, please. So I've talked about what we already know, what we already have, what we've already discussed. Now we're going to kind of get to the why, and that's where our headliners really are going to dive deep. To us, to those of us on this call and in this collaborative, this is self-evident and urgent. Many of us, I'm a little bit vintage, as you can tell from the color of my hair. I remember that it took 6 months to get all the 5,000 children that were apart from their caregivers back with them at Katrina. That feels like a moral urgency to us, but this can be difficult to translate that moral and ethical urgency into a compelling reason for those of our organizational leaders to devote resources to this. And there's no one magic law, regulation, rule, or right action to compel an organization. I think about these things all the time, the interface between regs, laws, and ethics. But we would like to give you a few tools. Next slide, please. I would be the person, thank you. RAPM has some beautiful, our Center of Excellence Brothers and Sisters, which James Hodge championed and created. And Region 5 for Kids came out with our legal guidance refresher just a couple of weeks ago. Next slide, please. James has refreshed this less than a year ago. Next slide, please. And then ours has a very special edition. Next slide, or next. One thing that we did is partner with Dr. DeBruin as our lead author on this. We are blessed to have Dr. DeBruin sit with us in our legal and ethical work group. I have not seen a legal or an ethical framework, rather, for family reunification. We included that as an appendix in our legal guidance. Next. So the why is self-evident. Then why are there gaps in this process? Why are there gaps in this process? The quote you see in front of you here is from that paper by Dr. Spektorsky, Dr. Lin, Dr. Chung, and Dr. Carney. Next. And again, I had referenced that paper with that colorful infographic. The Joint Commission, and the Joint Commission is not the be-all and end-all, but they still accredit most of the hospitals in this country. They have been trying to refresh their emergency medicine standards. Next. And yes, they have uplifted somewhat the risk and the recovery portion by demanding HVAs be more responsive, demanding that there be a disaster recovery plan. And in this is a Joint Commission publication that most hospital accreditation officers try to use. It's called the R3. And the rationale, and they finally say so in one of their publications, the recovery plan must address how family reunification, identification of adults and unaccompanied children will occur. Next slide. So how do we engage, encourage, and support our own organizations for that true commitment to these best practices? Change management is a science and an art, and that would be a whole multi-day discussion about how to manage change through an organization. And I want to address community hospitals' concerns. They say, we're not big pediatric specialty center. We don't have resources like that. Convince them that we are all in this together and partner, give the materials to them. in the form of all the things that I showed you already. The playbook is there for them. Acknowledge the exhaustion of our children's hospitals and our colleagues. We all, those of us who work in children's hospitals, know about having to be the answer in our communities. We're expected to have the answers. We're expected to take all the kids and transfer, and we're expected to do all the planning. But I would encourage you, don't do it all yourself. Partner up with like-minded schools. Our school systems are hungering to partner with us because this is their responsibility too, and they have databases you would not believe on their students. Should there, God forbid, be a school shooting, you will get so much great partnership from your schools in terms of assisting in the Family Reunification Center. Give away resources that I just shared with you and host that tabletop and leverage what you can offer. It feels like a never-ending task. It feels kind of impossible. Next slide, please. Keep going. But if you team up, even if you just say, we're going to do this with schools and maybe a community hospital, just maybe a threesome to get together with us at a children's hospital to do a small reunification tabletop, you will uplift an entire community just with that and sharing all those resources. So I would say that the duty to plan, the ethical duty to plan, which you'll hear about from Dr. DeBruin, and the really innate nature of everyone wanting to do the right thing, they do, they absolutely do. And when you combine law enforcement, schools, NECMEC representative, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, anybody who feels this way, if you get 2 or 3 together on a tabletop, the ideas will flow and the excitement will flow to improve their organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor James Hodge, who's going to talk about the legal aspects. And he's the real lawyer. I just hang out with some. And then we'll be handing over to Deb DeBruin, who is from Minnesota. That's the other M school, and a colleague of mine on the Region 5 for Kids Legal and Ethics Work Group. And I thank you for your attention. Take it away, James.
Okay, Marie, thank you so much. You hang out with lawyers, and I hang out with doctors. It's all good. So let's go next slide, if you would. And Laura, thank you for advancing slides. I'll just say next as we go through. My pace is even going to be faster than what you saw. Oh, no, actually, I'm not quite there yet. My pace will be quick, but we'll have opportunities for questions and comments after Deborah has a chance to address this as well, time permitting with my schedule. So this is what we're going to try to do. Let's just make sure we're on the same page with the legal issues that can be profound during these events. We're dealing with some dicey situations here in regards to family reunification, particularly through pediatric hospitals, which absolutely will face these issues, some of which you all have highlighted for me to address: legal liability around information sharing, criteria for matching unaccompanied minors with caregivers and chain of custody, Q&A a little bit afterwards as well. Next, we know what has to happen. This has to happen. The problem is it needs to happen as quickly as possible too. We're working really hard during emergency events, be they single shooter type situations or long-term events like Hurricane Katrina, as Marie mentioned. We need to reunify these families to the fullest degree we can, but along the way, mistakes can occur, and those mistakes can lead to tripping points that can raise legal issues along the way. Next slide gives us a little illustration of exactly the types of legal issues you all have experienced. Or if you haven't, you will, if you have to do reunification at any significant level. You're going to have health access issues related to the kids themselves. You're going to have discrimination-related concerns. Which kids, which families got priorities, under what circumstances. Informed consent is going to be really tough to pull off when you can't reach who you need under every circumstance. The liability issues we'll address. We'll address emergencies in just a second, too. I don't want to hit on immigration today, believe me. But at some point, we're going to have to realize there's going to be a public health emergency in the backdrop of what we're seeing in Chicago, in Portland, and other areas. And that's going to get even more dicey fast. Custody issues will be addressed, and privacy as well. Next, we got to set the stage. You have to understand, under some of these events, not all, but some of these reunification events, you're going to be working in a very different legal environment. Now, we know this because we've seen during COVID every single one of these emergency declarations being declared simultaneously. And if you're not aware of just exactly what that means, we're talking total game-changing shift in the legal environment. The things you couldn't do before, now you can. The things you might have thought were possible in the routine events, now they're more complicated. In fact, the next slide gives you a real strong sense of exactly what we have to do in real-time events where emergencies are declared. As next, if you would. That is how we are kind of what medical doctors might call their medical triage environment. Great, please do that, doctors. You all are great at that. Lawyers are particularly good at legal triage. We're going to be working to find various different solutions to real-time problems, like with reunification, that can take us from the tempest of the storm to something considerably calmer. Now, I raise this now because no matter whether you like it or not in some of these reunification events, this is being done. This is going to have to be done because the circumstances around reunification can trip those legal wires very significantly. Next up, let's shift our gears a little bit more to the liability around information sharing and just in general, what and how this plays out to some degree. Next slide gives us something none of us want to get trapped into, this sort of web of liability risks. Here's the various different types of themes through which reunification or other emergency preparedness and response efforts can trip you up as a provider, a doctor, somebody working in the scheme of how you're just trying to administer a family reunification plan. You don't want to be caught in this web. This is not a web that you want to trip. You don't want to trip the privacy wire. You don't want to get involved in the HIPAA privacy rule. You don't want anything close to unprofessional conduct, any claims of invasion of privacy or violations of state privacy laws. How do you avoid all these specific concerns is a big issue of what we'll try to think through with reunification. The next slide gives us some of those premier concerns, though. We're going to talk a little bit more about medical malpractice, breach of privacy, breach of informed consent, and custody interference issues. First, on the privacy front, if we can. And it's very important to mention. You can keep that slide up. We'll get to this thought in just a second. But on privacy, everybody gets tripped up. Everybody on the idea that the HIPAA privacy rule and issues like FERPA are going to come into play to stop us from sharing information that we really need to share for reunification purposes. I'm here to tell you, as per a slide you'll see in a second, those are not going to trip you up. They have exceptions that allow you to share the data you need to engage reunification purposes for minors, especially under these circumstances, and particularly in declared emergencies. So very necessary to mention how many even existing privacy laws at the federal and state level under HIPAA or FERPA or other equivalents, they get waived. They get waived systematically, temporarily, but waived so you can share the data that you need. I get a lot of requests from practitioners just really worried about this, like they can't imagine or don't want to actually find themselves tripping that HIPAA privacy rule wire. You're not going to trip it if you're sharing data to reunify kids with their parents. It's legit. Now, as you go forward on next slide, the other thing to remember about some of these other premier liability risks, you will, during an emergency, hopefully find yourself under that umbrella of liability coverage. And what this slide is designed to show you is that there are a lot of emergency triggered or liability protections during emergencies that you may fall with under. And if you do, the types of actions you take, so long as they're non-criminal and they are intent and designed to improve the public's health, reunify families, and do other initiatives, you're going to walk away or be scot-free on the liability front, even if something doesn't go quite as planned. But the other thing about liability, let's be really conscientious of, because Maria and I have talked it through, I bet you it's part of Deborah's duty to plan, and that is, it's the failure to reunify that is also problematic. It's the failure to execute a plan that makes sense, that's conscientious, that follows the custody arrangements, that does everything that we're telling you and guiding you to on a day like this. Failing to do that might be your biggest liability event. And with that as a backdrop, minimizing those risks as per the next slide really gives you a strong sense of the types of things that you're in control of during reunification purposes. That's a next slide request. Thank you so much. Mitigating risks. You're going to be dealing with shifting standards. Be prepared for that. Adjust legally to those standards is part of what you have to do in real-time events for longer duration. There's going to be a transparency factor at work here. You will have oversight and internal review processes that you'll be asked to clarify and asked to utilize. The soundness of what you do in emergencies will be on display. It will be measured later, and it will be tested. make sure that you're approaching this with the soundest ethical guidance that Deborah can give us. Consistency. You do not handle children in one way and one day and a different way the next day. That is a liability event just alone. The factual basis for that becomes highly problematic. And if you want to avoid a lot of these potential liability risks, including the one about failing to do what you should have done, you follow Deborah's guidance that you'll see here shortly. Now, let's turn our attention to matching those criteria for unaccompanied minors as per the next slide. One of the things that we've got to be conscientious of, and that's per our call out here, our next slide will give us a little diagram to think through. This is going to be the toughest part we all know of reunification. You've got kids, they're unidentified with their specific caregivers, identifying them, matching those criteria, making sure that goes right is at the heart of what can be legally most problematic. Safely reuniting minors with correct caregivers while protecting child welfare in the line of legal requirements. It's going to be a balancing act, and you must walk this wire carefully. But to be sure, there are definitive ways to do this. If you follow the guidance Marie has noted, you're not going to hit too many of the legal concerns that might arise during these circumstances. You interview that kid, you use every known identifiable matrix for figuring out who these kids are, safe words, school medical records, as Marie noted. You cross-check with court documents, custody orders, birth certificates, whatever you can cross-check to identify that kid, and then you match it carefully with those who are confirmed to be in lawful custody of those children. You're always preferring the parent or legal guardian unless there's some indomitable legal barrier. This is not me saying this. This is courts. This is state government saying you will match that kid to that legal custodian, period. If absent, you can consider other relatives and guardians. Again, that is a careful matching process. And you check for disabilities, special needs, and sibling group reunification to the fullest degree you can, because these are protected statuses, particularly on disabilities and kids with special needs. They're entitled to additional protections. Next slide. So that verification process, legally laid out, so critical to sort of note as we go through is kind of what's laid out here neatly. It's going to vary state to state, and it's going to vary on whether you're in that emergency declaration status or not. But you're going to have collaborative efforts, as Marie noted. That's so critical. It's not a one-stop shop, and you're not solely responsible to Pediatric Hospital for making this work right. You'll have a lot of other agents, but coordination is so critical. Confirm that legal custody. You do that to the fullest degree you can through available documentation that should be made available, as we've seen in multiple court settings, consistently, even during emergencies. If there's a dispute, maintain that kid. You keep that kid on site. You do not let that child out until that dispute is resolved, and jurisdictional questions you can clearly resolve with the help of lawyers under the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act, which nearly every state has signed. The chain of custody principles, so critical to highlight here. Legally, we're going to be looking for these things if there's a trip up or a problem. And if you've done these right, we may legally be out of the woods on any major concerns. You're under the umbrella, in other words. You document each custody transfer with date, time, and person receiving the kid. You make sure that you use secure custody logs or electronic records to do it. You maintain that custody until reunification is absolutely complete. And you just flat out avoid release without documented verification. You'd rather have a parent balking at the hospital about when and why they haven't gotten their kid yet until you verify that specific source is the right one for it, versus letting a minor out of your hospital custody to the wrong party. Next up, slide was, this diagram is really replicating something Marie, I think, did a great job showing us all the different workflows that are available to help you track what you should be doing, assessing the legal requirements as per box 4 at the top right of your screen here. But the simple reality is following procedure, following it well, is going to be your way out of so many of the legal concerns that you might have experienced otherwise. And I really highlight and emphasize that because the one thing about this scheme is every single one of these is going to trip something legally, but it's going to depend on your jurisdiction. It's going to depend on the emergency status. Following it, however, these sorts of steps will help considerably. And our last slide before a couple of quick notes, I promise to get back to the HIPAA-related issues as per the next slide here. And let's be clear when I said, I do not see this as your tripping point, and I mean it. Because the privacy rule and FERPA alike, which applies to kids' educational records in schools, should you be matching with school data as per Marie's suggestion on some of those fronts, Listen, the rules are bent towards making sure that minors are protected in exactly these types of situations. If you're finding that somebody's proclaiming you cannot share data to reunify kids as necessary or to get the proper associated care to those children in these real-time events because of some privacy rule or FERPA-related limitation, I would absolutely, turn on them and make sure they understand there is exceptions to these rules that allow for these types of data exchanges. Just period. Nobody's going to actually, at least in any right mind or any courtroom setting that I can imagine, going to be questioning a pediatric hospital that allowed out some minor health data about a child for the purpose of reunifying that child. That is simply not going to be a privacy event. Now, I can't speak to more sensitive state privacy laws for the moment without looking a little more carefully in all the jurisdictions. But under federal privacy standards, which tend to supply the norm, you're going to get to share these data. In fact, you have an obligation to share these data for reunification purposes. And then finally, in our last slide here, which time permitting, I'll be brief on, of course, allowing Deborah full opportunity for great discussion points on the ethics side. This legal checklist is so helpful, I think, at least to show you the types of things that you're after. You've got to do these things well. These are avoiding legal tripping points. If you're aware of suspected abuse and neglect, you do report that even during disasters. You make that clear if you're aware of it from the moment that a child is within your custody. There's obviously, resources of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which have the opportunity to report data of that nature. You notify Child Protective Services. When you're dealing with a parent or a guardian who can't be located, they're a partner in all of these states in every particular way to the degree to which you can, assuming that reunification is going to take longer than hours and moves into the days. And you get court oversight. You may think, gosh, how long can we house these children or deal with these circumstances while we wait on courts to figure out these custody issues? You're not going to wait long. Courts are going to be on this thing, as we've seen in California, Oregon, Colorado, and other states. We've assessed some of these issues. Courts are all over this during emergencies. They can issue emergency orders and very well will. And the coordination efforts here you're seeing on the right side of your screen too. Do what Marie says legally to avoid some of the major tripping points. Coordinate, leverage, work hard to make sure that the people you're working with to reunify these kids who desperately need to get back in their caregivers' hands are the types you can trust and are doing the very best work with you to accomplish that same end. I hope these comments, though brief, have been helpful to guide you through some of those legal points to consider. And without further ado, let me turn it over to my great colleague, Deborah DeBruin.
Thanks, James. Before I start, let me just check in. I know that James has some time limitations here. Did we want to take a few questions for James at this point, or do you just want me to go?
There's some.
I think that would be a good idea because one of our participants would like to ask a question about proper documentation was mentioned and what types of documentation would be considered proper. And James maybe could address that.
Sure, I'll be happy to. And what I'd like for you all to do is, Moderator Marie, if you're serving that capacity, you stop me at any point. I will be brief and cut right to the chase. There's a couple of great reports out there that actually really show precisely what sort of documentation you're going to want to have on hand in relation to the reunification process. And those might be best as I'll try to chat one of those resources to you, but also where they put the other stuff that was embedded within my slides, as your moderator noted, it includes one or two of those resources. So I'll be short. I'll be short in regards to my comments here, but there's a really good documentation, sort of prerequisites for what type of information you should be gathering. And it's kept to a minimum, obviously, for good purposes. But yeah, there's some precise data you should have about each kid and family under these circumstances.
Anna also had a question.
Yeah, my question was really there's certain disasters like wildfire or earthquake and landslides where you might actually lose the documentation or not have access to it. So what happens, or what should we be doing? And maybe this is an ethical and not necessarily a legal one, to reunify those children more as quickly as we can without actually having access to those documents.
That's a good point, Anna. There are certain events, particularly like you're saying with earthquakes or hurricanes or things that just wipe out, entire resources that we normally would utilize for this purpose. Now, I'm going to venture to say there's no way you're going to wipe out every resource possible. We have so much good information about children. We can gather this information relatively quickly in real time too, through social media and other sources. But I will say, to the degree to which that occurs, it's part of the legal triage environment that I was highlighting so well, or hopefully so much, to make sure you clear that there will be events where you're going to have to utilize and rely on additional information gathering and sources, and validating the accuracy of that information will be critical in some of these specific events. I would hope it to be a rare event in the United States where we simply do not have any way to gather that particular data on any of the many channels to legitimately make that reunification process work. But it's a great point, and one for which we'll triage during the event itself.
Dr. Hodge, you mentioned gathering information and you mentioned social media. What about sharing information as well? So would you count social media of one of the avenues that a hospital or a healthcare system can share information with regards to reunification? Or would you say that's a no-no? Or are there avenues on social media where it's like legal to do so?
Great point, Regina. So listen, it's a way in which we can get out information quickly, we can share it extensively, and to be sure, whether we want it to happen or not, parents and others looking for children will use social media in any way necessary to actually find them. So monitoring for that and being aware of it, very good idea. We do run into problems with in relation to social media, however, and that is some for which you're seeing guidance nationally out there really accentuating. Don't go that route as a hospital unless you absolutely have to, because of the tripping points and issues related to potential for sharing data about children who are vulnerable in a way that may allow for, particular, let's just say, wrongful parties to become involved. Persons who aren't entitled to custody coming forward claiming custody because they got this information when you never wanted them to receive it in any other way. Consequently, I think it's an avoidance strategy in regards to social media for the sort of information coming out of the hospital, but monitoring that information through social media that for which you may be able to help use for reunification purposes could be very smart. It's a touch and go situation, to be sure, in the situation that Anna mentioned about if you have a complete, almost just tear down of some of the informational infrastructures you would rely on anyway. Social media might be the way you're gathering that data, and it might be the way you're expressing it. But it is a very strong de-emphasis against using it when you're dealing with private information about children whose literally entire next steps and custody arrangements need to be done right. So I would emphasize, try to find another channel for getting the best information to the fullest extent, and reunify as many kids as you can without it.
Thank you.
I see Marie answered one of the questions in chat.
Thank you, Marie. I'm not able to monitor the chat right now, but to be sure, if there's anything else that arises when I'm concluded here, as I very well should turn over to Deborah now, I'll check out chat for the next few moments I have before I have to exit the session. So maybe let's turn it back over to Deborah DeBrun for her comments.
Thank you, Professor
Great.
Hodge.
Thanks,
Excited to
James.
hear from you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Marie. So I'm here to talk about ethical issues with respect to family reunification. Next slide, please. As we've already heard today, the good news regarding the development of reunification plans is that a lot of helpful guidance is available. The guidance tends to focus on operational issues and to some extent, as James has said, on legal issues. There is a serious lack of ethics guidance on these issues, and that's going to really be the focus of my remarks today. Next slide. Sometimes, in the absence of guidance, we can look to the published ethics literature to try and find helpful analysis of the issues at hand. Unfortunately, the ethics literature does not really attend to family reunification in the context of response to mass casualty incidents. The existing literature on family reunification focuses on other contexts. The first is immigration policy, where the issues really relate to reuniting families of refugees or asylum seekers, or to family separation at the border in the context of immigration enforcement. The second context relates to therapeutic approaches to repairing relationships between estranged family members. And the third context relates to the goals of the child protection system. That is to say, to transitioning kids in foster care back to living with their families. So unfortunately, the existing ethics literature does not really provide resources to guide preparedness for reunification in the context of mass casualty incidents. Next slide, please. Given that gap in ethics resources, the Legal and Ethics Work Group of the Region 5 for Kids Pandemic Disaster Center for Excellence, as Marie has already mentioned, created an ethics framework for family reunification. The goal of the framework is to provide ethics guidance for organizational preparedness and for care delivery in the context of a disaster requiring reunification. That context is rife with ethical dilemmas, and the guidance can help to resolve those. It can also, as Marie has said a number of times, it can also help to explain why it's so important to plan appropriately for reunification, because as we will see, our fundamental value commitments really require it. As a result, ethics guidance can also help to provide a basis for consistent response across institutions. James has really emphasized the importance of consistency, and I want to do that too. Consistency can really help to make disaster response more effective, more transparent, more fair, and more equitable. Next slide, please. You'll find the ethical framework by using the QR code on this slide. A direct link to the document was also provided in the pre-session materials, the Padlet, for today's webinar. Next slide, please. So the process for developing an ethics framework is important, and I'd like to take a minute to talk about how we developed this particular ethical framework. Ethical frameworks are always grounded in the fundamental ethical values or principles. Different states characterize their foundational value commitments a little bit differently, but there tends to be important overlap. So since we were developing this framework for FEMA Region 5, we started by creating a crosswalk of all the basic values identified in the preparedness plans for the states in that region. We identified the ethical values that were endorsed in common across those states' materials, and then we used those values as the base of our framework, and I'll show you what those look like in a minute. Then we incorporated existing guidance on reunification. And as I already mentioned, most of that guidance is operational or legal in nature, but the analysis is really meant to synthesize the ethical values and the legal or operational guidance, that is to find the connections, right? I'll give some examples of this as I talk more about the framework specifics in a minute. Finally, the process involved having members of the Legal and Ethical Work Group and the Reunification Work Group provide feedback on drafts of the framework. So there was this iterative process of drafting, review, and revision until the framework was completed. Next slide, please. This is the structure of the framework. The ethical framework begins by identifying those fundamental ethical commitments that are shared by preparedness plans across the FEMA Region 5 states. It then outlines the ethical objectives that must be met in order to honor those fundamental ethical commitments. So the structure is fairly simple. Next slide, please. These are the fundamental commitments. So given the trauma associated with family separation due to mass casualty incidents, including both significant emotional distress and serious safety risks, it's critical that the process for family reunification be trustworthy. That's really core. This requires that the rest of the ethical norms that are on this slide be reflected in response to these incidents. So, accountability. That means hospital leadership, in collaboration with governmental agencies and community partners, should be accountable to the community, to the children, and to families who are separated by crisis, and to the health professionals who have to respond to the crisis. Transparency means we have a clear shared understanding of reunification plans, which not only promotes their implementation, but also provides a basis for public confidence. Beneficence. Reunification plans should be designed to protect the public from harm by mitigating harms associated with family separation during crises and avoiding harms created by inadequate planning for family reunification. James talked about that some, and I think it's really important that we recognize that inadequate planning can cause harms. Respecting individuals and groups, individual rights should be respected, and plans should really strive to reflect the values of the communities that will be affected by the plans. Fairness and equity. Finally, duties of fairness require both fair processes and substantively fair treatment of individuals and groups. So hospitals should work to ensure that the benefits and burdens of reunification plans are equitably distributed across populations. Next slide, please. So those were the fundamental commitments. Now what we want to do is talk about the ethical objectives, right? Remember, the idea here is that meeting these objectives allows us to honor our fundamental commitments that I outlined on the previous slide. I'm not going to talk separately about trustworthiness, because creating and implementing reunification plans with an eye toward achieving the rest of the objectives will also promote the trustworthiness of crisis response. Okay, so to promote accountability, hospitals should recognize and act upon their duty to plan. You've heard that phrase a number of times, and here it goes again. Impromptu decision-making during disaster undermines the trustworthiness of the response, given the difficulty of creating and implementing reasonable plans during a crisis, and the tendency of ad hoc decision-making to fail to meet the ethical standards that we've been discussing. So the failure to plan increases risks to children and families affected by separation. The failure to plan also creates moral and psychological distress for the professionals who have to respond to crisis without adequate support. Okay, and it's important to avoid that. Hospitals should ensure their plans fulfill their ethical obligations to safeguard vulnerable children and effectively reunite them with their caregivers. They should devise plans that are evidence-based where possible, recognizing that that's not always possible. And the plans should reflect best practices. So availing yourself of information like the information that's being provided in today's webinar and that has been provided by the Pediatric Pandemic Network is a really good approach. Hospital reunification plans should also include processes for review and revision to promote improvement because, of course, improvement promotes accountability. Next slide, please. To promote transparency, hospitals should clearly communicate reunification plans with personnel who may be involved in implementing them. The failure to do so increases the risk that response will be ad hoc and ineffective, with the harms that we've already noted that this can cause. Okay? Hospitals should also disseminate information regarding family reunification plans as widely as possible in different languages, using a variety of approaches, materials, and venues for distribution of information to effectively reach diverse members of the public who may be affected by family separation. There really is not a one-size-fits-all approach here, unfortunately. It'd be simpler if there was, but there isn't. Care should also be taken to adequately inform the public without creating undue fear and to avoid or counter dissemination of misinformation or disinformation. Next slide, please. To promote beneficence, which means that we should promote or protect the public from harm, hospital personnel should receive training to recognize and respond to harms associated with family separation. Of course, children who are separated from their families are at risk of a number of harms, including physical and mental trauma, neglect, abuse, and exploitation. Children's caregivers and other loved ones also suffer due to separation, right? So there's a lot of harm to be concerned about preventing here. Reunification plans should incorporate best practices to promote safety of unaccompanied children, for example, by developing and implementing plans, as James has discussed, for definitively identifying, registering, and tracking children and ensuring that they're released only to appropriate custodial caregivers. Plans should also provide trauma-informed care, for example, by creating pediatric safe areas that provide supervision as well as comfort needs while they await reunification, and providing behavioral health supports to help address their distress. Finally, they should work to effectively reunite kids with their caregivers, for example, by facilitating efficient information sharing among hospitals and other response partners to support family reunification. And James has already talked about sort of the legal issues around information sharing. To promote respect for individuals and groups, hospitals should establish plans for protecting basic safety needs. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. My bad. Thank you. Hospitals should establish plans for protecting basic needs for safety and privacy of unaccompanied children and other family members seeking reunification, including, for example, creation of a hospital family reunification center. This commitment also This commitment to respect individuals also grounds a duty to provide the best care possible under crisis circumstances, including care for sick or injured children who may be unaccompanied or unidentified, and a focus on trauma-informed care for all unaccompanied children. Plans should also reflect the values of the communities that they will affect. Ideally, plans will be shaped by community input. That'll help ensure that response is culturally appropriate and that it recognizes access barriers and functional needs so that those can be responded to. Next slide, please. To promote fairness and equity, there we go. Plans should incorporate decision-making processes that consistently apply only ethically relevant. James talked about this as well from a legal perspective, non-discriminatory, non-arbitrary considerations. So, for example, personnel involved in crisis response should ensure that family members seeking information are treated consistently, with no special privilege being offered to any particular individuals or groups, for example, based on ability to pay, race and religion, ethnicity, etc. We could make that list longer, but you get the idea. Plans should incorporate provisions to honor duties of reciprocity. What that means is professionals who shoulder the responsibilities of family reunification should be appropriately supported, including being provided with resources to address their emotional and moral distress. The benefits and burdens of reunification services should be equitably distributed across the population. For example, more privileged groups should not receive more privileged services, such as hospitals prioritizing robust reunification services for families that are affiliated with the facility's health system, and then leaving less adequate services for unaffiliated patients. Nor should any groups bear disproportionate burdens, such as those associated with culturally inappropriate programs. Finally, reasonable efforts should be made to mitigate barriers to accessing support, for example, based on ability to pay for services. And we should also address functional needs, for example, appropriate translation services. That's it. That's the end. Thank you.
Great. I mean, this has been an amazing panel, and I know that Professor Hodge had to leave a little bit early because he had a class to teach. I'm going to open this up for question and answer, and what we'll do is we'll stop the screen share. We also have our self-reflection link that we'll put into the chat. So if you guys wanted to think a little bit about what we've discussed and what our panelists have shared with us, and just kind of like have a moment for your thoughts, that's fine as well. But I want to give the opportunity for y'all to come off camera if you're in a safe place to do so, and engage with our panelists and with each other.
Kind of overwhelming. But I also wanted to just address that sometimes ethics arguments feel difficult to make in an environment that is distressed financially, or operations always takes precedent. But I do think they're very cogent and salient when one presents them in a package along with operational quality improvement tools. That's why I made that one Venn diagram: law, regulations and ethics together, along with your operational uplift. If we always keep that at the center, I think you can't go wrong. You're not going to make a legal misstep or an ethical misstep if you are constantly looking to do the right thing and understanding the underpinnings of it. Why are we doing it this way? And are we thinking about all groups and being culturally competent in that thinking? So thanks, Deb.
You're welcome, and thanks for saying that, Marie. Let me just use those comments as a jumping off point to say one other thing, which is there's already been discussion about involving a sort of a number of people in the collaborations around creation and training and running tabletops, et cetera, on your plans, doing improvements. I would really encourage that you all involve your ethics folks. If you have ethics folks at your hospitals or health systems, they are great partners, and you should be able to make use of those resources as well, both in terms of sort of proactive involvement in planning as you're creating your plan or doing quality improvement, but also in the moment. James talked about doing legal triage. We talked about doing medical triage. James talked about doing legal triage, but ethics folks are also really quite used to sort of managing difficult cases in real time. It's part of what we do. And so I would really encourage you, if you have ethics folks available, to call on them.
Just a quick question. How many of you guys involve ethics in your emergency preparedness planning on a regular basis? I can't see the show of hands. It's hard. If you want to raise your hand in the reacts button, that
Yeah,
would give us
I
an
would
idea.
just say we haven't, and that I think this is a great kind of idea. I guess my question to you, Deb, is how
You just went on to mute, Sarita.
sorry, I was just gonna say thank you so much. I've not seen that we've involved an ethicist. My question to you, Deb, is how like what are there intricacies and disasters that ethicists must know first before diving into this? Like, is this something they're thinking about all the time? Because usually, like, as we're disaster specialists, we're kind of or like operations adjacent, like we're the worst case scenario. Not many people think about it. And we're thinking about it all the time. Is like when you say involve an ethicist, um, how much how much background do they already have or need to have before helping us dive into this conversation?
Oh, Deb, you're also on mute.
There we go. Now, can you hear me? Good question. What I would say is different ethicists have different levels of background or training, specifically in terms of disaster preparedness and response. But all ethicists should be able to access ethical resources and think about how to apply them. There are ethical resources available and networks of ethics folks who work on these issues. So I'm involved, for example, not just at my health system, but in my state and in my region in a couple of different regards. There are networks available for folks that they can call upon if it's not their area of specialization. And so, support can get provided in that kind of way.
I wanted to comment that in a large, in a hospital, often there's the spiritual care group, or you'll have an ethics group that often includes a spiritual care advisor, legal and ethics professionals who are able to help us. I don't have the right language. I'm an operationalist, but sort of hilariously, I was the one tapped to chair the Scarce Resource Allocation Committee during COVID in my health system because I had participated in these conversations. I was good at convening the lawyers, the ethicists, the spiritual care advisors, the community voices. Let's not forget, I think we all sort of forgot just to mention that community voice. And I mean, a patient advocate or a community advocate. And those persons sat on our team because it often comes in the sphere of scarce resource allocation, because somebody, oh my God, there's a massive blood shortage, or there's not enough hospital beds. How are we going to allocate resources? And that's often the functional, the muscle that we have to exercise more often. But this is a facet of that. And so while I'm an operationalist in this space, me and an ethicist and a lawyer and a person who is a spiritual care advisor kind of make an ideal team. And the ethicists have the language that I can use to create policy or to create process. That was very powerful in my organization, especially during the COVID pandemic.
I think there's a lot of power in using moral justifications to do what we do, right? So, we recently had a response to everybody probably had to respond to the IV fluid shortage that happened late last year. But we actually used a moral framework to actually get people to come to the table and engage in the activation. And so I think I love partnering with the ethics folks in our institution just because we've been able to create moral frameworks to really move the C-suite to do certain things, right? And so when you're talking about engaging people in emergency preparedness and not just reunification, but although we're like focused on reunification in this group, but if you can actually use the moral card, it actually moves the needle just a little bit.
I agree.
I'm wondering if we don't have questions, if there's takeaways that you would like to share with each other, with us, with our speakers.
I want to gratitude for the Padlet and the archiving concepts. The idea that you guys have and I meant it when I said there's an abundance of riches in the archived materials, from the process maps that Michelle Pantea shared last session to all the documents and all the best practices. This is what I would, if I was going to my team and saying, let's do, and chunk it out, just do one thing. Say we're going to settle on job action sheets for the folks that staff the safe area. I'm making up a small project. This could become a jumping off point for some amazing improvements using that quality improvement framework, and having all the reasons. We're doing it because of all these reasons. And I don't want to make it sound like our C-suite leaders are not moral, ethical, or people and they only care about Joint Commission. Hope I don't give that impression. But coming to them as a package of the why, they often think of resources first. You know, they don't have the resources to designate an area or to have certain carts or certain supplies. But I think coming to them with just a very balanced framework of legal, regulatory, ethical, and operational, as the gifts that we've been given through this DRC focus area, I think you would make a very persuasive argument to engage in that kind of process improvement in the reunification space.
Great point, Marie. I think I'm wondering, we're getting into, hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm good. I was going to share a comment if you weren't wrapping up.
No, please.
Okay, sorry. I was struggling to find my button earlier when Marie was starting to talk. So I am at Cardinal Glennon, for those of you who don't know me, and we've been working with our social work and our child life teams, talking a lot about the individuals that we could call upon to help. So volunteers to everyone from like EVS workers to C-suite and who could help. And so I was wondering, I was a few minutes late, so I apologize if I missed that, but I was wondering any advice from an ethical standpoint on who we can have in those spaces, who we can call upon for help that wouldn't create excess work for the hospital. We are a place that, like, to work here and to volunteer here, you have to be like background checked because we're a children's hospital, but then I don't know if that's a blanket like okay for like anyone to be in the child safe area and watch them while we're doing reunification. And so I was curious if any hospitals had thoughts, or Deborah, if you had any thoughts on that, you could share.
I mean, I can start it. It feels to me a lot like two things I would say about this. One is a lot will depend upon, like, different places are going to have dramatically different capacity to manage things in the way that you're describing. So which personnel probably will vary a lot from place to place. You know, a big, quaternary care center in a urban health system is going to be very different than a critical access hospital in a rural area. That's one thing. The other thing is it feels to me that there are certainly moral issues here in terms of expectations about training, effectiveness, privacy, etc., ability to provide trauma-informed care, etc. It feels like we sort of need James here to answer this question as well, because it feels like there have to be some legal limits to who can access those spaces. And I'm afraid I don't know the answer to those questions.
It would also come at staffing the safe area is probably a job action sheet. And if, it's a job family, and those job families would have to meet criteria. Obviously, you would have to have layers, and this is where it's going to be different. Obviously, our child life and social work people talk about vetted. This is their everyday job, and they would call in the troops and have multiple layers with a pre-designated job action sheet for pediatric safe area staffing. But large children's hospitals are going to have that excellent volunteer cadre who are vetted, trained, and also background check, fingerprinted, like the whole schmear or whatever your hospital does. That is such a great question, because that should be part of the pediatric safe area planning.
Yes.
Who is allowed to be here, and what guarantees do we have that they are impeccable in terms of can you imagine being a parent and hearing that your kid has been sitting for 8 hours with a worker, whether it be volunteer or whatever? But that is a key on our job action sheet for the pediatric safe area staffing. The airtight, perfect, impeccability of that staff is something that if a parent, a staff member, a counsel, the legal counsel to your risk organization or to your risk management office is going to want that to be tight. That's something that I would work on with risk management, and make sure that most volunteer teams and most child protection or child life and social work teams really know how to manage that, how to do that. Our volunteer services people work with the lawyers all the time. They don't let anybody just come in the hospital.
I see Nita has her hand up, and this might be the last comment that we have before
sure.
we go to closing remarks.
I was just going to say, Rachel, I did residency at Glennon. And so if the layout is the same, there are some sibling and child play areas. So in our reunification plan, we kind of worked backwards, and we looked at the space first and who already has access to that space. So I'm not familiar with the plan that is at Glennon right now, but for our plan, the sibling play area is the designated child safe area. And so that space only has access by Child Life, Music Therapy, and Family Resource Center. So kind of working backwards and looking at what is the space itself and who has access to that badge space kind of helped us determine who that staff would be, and then therefore what future staff would be allowed to have access. It helped us at the moment, and of course, given the large scale and how many people you would need, that would need to change, but that was kind of a starting point for us.
Awesome. Thank you all for your comments. I know it was a complex question, so I appreciate the insights.
We did something similar at Rainbow, looking at our child life playrooms on the floors, because they're locked units and only certain people can get in and out. Just keeping that the safe areas. And they're all vetted.
Awesome. I do have to say that we are nearing the end of our collaborative. So I think we have 3 more sessions. All of our participants should expect an email because it's time for highlights from each of our institutions who are participating in the DRC. And I just wanted to say that ahead of time before the closing remarks. I'll turn it over to Laura now.
Thank you, Anna. You're reading my mind. The November session is coming up pretty quickly, and we are still looking for teams to report out on any aspect of what they've been doing within the DRC. So if you think that a representative from your team wouldn't mind presenting for 8 to 10 minutes in November or a future collaborative session, I think there's only 4 more, February and May and June. That's a part of the collaborative, is that we want you to come and talk about your experience, good or bad, gaps or achievements, because people learn from each other and you have something to share with other people. I'll also add that this topic area makes me feel like I need to go back to college and get a degree in this topic area because there is so much to learn. And I really enjoyed listening to all of you, including Professor Hodge, who's clearly an excellent teacher. So thank you all for that. As we look forward, the December, it's not going to be a session. It's more like an open area for people to come forth and ask their questions or share ideas or things that they've been doing. We will give you more details at the November collaborative session. And then you can see that we have a focus area session in January, which is right after the holiday. And then we'll be back to a full collaborative session in February. Next slide, please. It's time to talk about drills. Chris McCarthy and the rest of the PPN drills and exercise team have developed packets of drill materials that for each focus area with patient and family member cards or case stories, very brief, that you can use to guide a hospital drill. And they do incorporate the DRC process and a few outcome measures. And that's what we want you to do, is to think about if you're planning on doing a drill and you want to use materials, within a couple of weeks, we'll have some downloadable, fully customizable materials for you. Chris McCarthy has agreed to do an orientation session. I'll put the link to the registration in the chat. You can see the QR code there as well. And really that is to show you the Word documents and explain to you how to customize and use them. And then we'll record it and it will be available. If you're still planning on doing a drill 1 and a drill 2, you can see the proposed timeline, but what you do is really up to you. Next slide, please. We are all about fireside chats. Thanks to Bridget Glennis, who is on or was on before, for leading the C2 task force. And they have 2 sessions in October and November. You can see the details here. I'll put the links in the chat. We'll also be highlighting all of these sessions in the follow-up message that we always send out, and you can always ask us. Next slide, please. And you might remember that there was one fireside chat done by some of our mental and behavioral health task force on behalf of PPN. This is their second chat, sandwiched in between those other 2 that focus on children and youth with special health care needs and children with medical complexity. So this one, Mo Saidinejad and Ian Kodish will be speaking, so I'm sure it will be good. I'll put that link in here as well too. These fireside chats are less formal and a way for you to learn a little bit more about a topic area. And I will say, if you think about the PDPAC, the Pediatric Disaster Preparedness Self-Assessment for Children's Hospitals, children and youth with special health care needs, legal issues, and mental health were some of the questions that people in hospitals, children's hospitals, found harder to answer. So please consider sharing these invitations to attend the fireside chats. Anyone is welcome. You don't have to be in the DRC. Next slide. Here is the way to get CE credit if you're interested. There's a code, various ways to get it. I'll put that in the chat as well. Next slide, please. Please fill out the session evaluation. It's a brief set of 10 questions or less. We just want to know what you have to say. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you to all of the planners on the Reunification Oversight Group, as well as the awesome speakers. Maria, I really think we should look into doing a fireside chat in the first